So this Windows settings program here is kind of like an interface to what? To the registry, right? It allows you to communicate as a human being through a graphical user interface to talk to the internals of the computer, which would be the database that stores all the configuration items and what things are on and which things are off and where things are stored and stuff like that. And that's all stored in the registry. What's a database? It's basically a collection of information. Just say yes after everything I ask. Can a text file be used as a database?
Yes.
Yeah, because you can have a phone number on each individual line in a text file associated with somebody's name. How about an Excel spreadsheet?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a perfect example of a database because each record is kept on one line, and you can, as long as you can keep your information sorted correctly, you can always retrieve it. You can actually take an Excel spreadsheet and you can use it as a database table in most major database programs. So you can use Microsoft Access and connect to an Excel database, Excel spreadsheet, and that can be your database. You can add records to it or remove records from it. So it's just another style of database file. And then there are the database files themselves that have special characteristics that allow you to do more actions to them. But the registry is basically a database where records are kept with their associated records in an organized and logical manner that if you understand how to use it, it's an extremely powerful tool. In Linux doesn't have a registry. Okay? Linux and Unix do most of their work through plain text files as a registry. So that first question I asked, can a text file be used as a database? Yes, because Unix uses it all the time as your way of communicating with the operating system. But since most of us don't use Unix or Linux, it's kind of a moot point. Let me just minimize this for now. So here we have the control panel again. Now what is the control panel? Control panel is basically, just like settings, a user interface to registry settings or the configuration items in your computer. Once again, I don't really care for the category, but Microsoft wants to bring that up first, so I click on this little button down here. And I usually change to large icons because this is the way it always used to be, and I'm kind of a creature of habit. So I like to see these large icons, and it makes more sense to me. But what does the control panel do? If I click on date and time, it comes up with a little interface that has a clock and things like that. But when I actually save the changes, where do they get saved to?
Registry.
Registry. Right. Yeah. If I want to make changes to the system, the changes get saved into the registry. So even Windows Defender stuff is going to have files in its own folder that will help with the initialization of the application. But the registry is where the bulk of the settings will be kept. Okay, so on this page here, you should recognize this from down here. You see where it says System down here? If you click on System, this is the page that comes up. When else does this page come up? If you go to the My Computer or My PC icon and you right-click on it, and you click on Properties, guess what comes up? This page right here. I really can't show you right now, but we'll look at it another time. Why is this Windows 10 Pro computer kind of hobbled a little bit? It has an i7 processor in it. It should be fairly quick. It only has 3 gigs of RAM in it. Okay, so that might not be enough RAM to do a lot of serious operations once you get the thing going. So if you had, what's the ideal amount to start with on a Windows 10 Pro computer? How much RAM should you have?
8.
No, 4. We'll say as a starting point, we'll
start.
say 4. If you're doing some serious work, if you want to have a little room for the future, secure your computer, you might want to start with 8. okay? Or if you're doing any graphics work, a lot of pictures and things like that, you might want to start with 8. But it will work with 3, it will work better with 4, and you don't need 8 unless you find that you have a speed problem. If you're having a problem with speed on your Windows 10 computer, it's probably more of a problem with a slow hard drive, a mechanical hard drive, instead of a solid state hard drive, than it is with not having enough RAM in it, unless you get down below 4 gigs of RAM. Okay? And most decent computers these days come with 6 or 8 or even 12, but you can still find them for 4. I set up a virtual Windows 10 Pro machine today and I gave it 4 gigs of RAM, just because I knew it was going to work. But then we have all these other things here. What's this device manager? Remember we looked at device manager? That was one of the first things we looked at. It's going to let you set your interface to all your devices on there, like your disk drives and your DVD drive and your USB ports and your serial ports and your monitor and your hard drive and all those other mechanical devices in there. So that's the user interface to that. How about remote settings? What are remote settings? Whether you're going to allow someone to connect to your computer from a remote location or not. Okay, that's what that's all about. By default, it's turned off. Because someone cannot by default connect to your computer using Microsoft Remote Desktop. But you can turn that on and allow that type of communication. System protection. What do you think would be under system protection? How about restore points? Yeah, restore points. So that's that other page we're going to look at, and then also advanced system settings. Okay. So the system information is a really important page because it tells you something about the computer. Now you see all these values on the left side here where it says processor, installed memory, system type, pen and touch, okay? Where do those come from? Not the registry, they're just a template. It's on the page there, okay? But everything on the right side here, what kind of processors in the computer, how much RAM is in there, what the operating system is, what the name is, what the work group is, where's all that kept? In the registry. So these are just blank fields, just like this. This doesn't have a computer description, but if it did have one, where would it be kept? In the registry. Yeah, and you can actually add that right from this page right here by clicking Change Settings. And that Change Settings is an interface between this page and what? The registry, okay?
So, you talked about, I can't quite see it, but the name of the computer.
Right, like right here.
Yeah, what do you put in it?
Well, so, is this really important for you? Only if you have a network, okay? Because if you have a network, you cannot, just like you can't have 2 files in the same directory with the same name. The reason you can't do that is because if you tried to open it, which file would it open?
Right.
Well, the name has to be unique on your network as well, because when you want to communicate across a network, it has to have a unique name.
So that's a network with another person.
Yeah, so if we had this computer connected to this computer with a wire and we were sharing files and things like that, I would identify this computer with its name. I would identify this computer with its name.
So you don't really need that if you only have yourself.
Well, you don't need, it has to have a name. You don't have to change it.
Oh,
If you have 2 computers with the same name, one of them has to be changed to something different, okay? Otherwise, they will not be able to communicate. And then down here, we have work group, and what is work group for? That's also for networking, okay? That's for your network interface, because you'll only be able to communicate with other computers that are also in the work group called work group, okay? This could be called, I'm gonna pick on you, Tom, a minute. This could be called Tom's Network, okay? And if this was called Tom's Network and I want to communicate with the work group, with this computer here that's on the same work group, it would also have to be called Tom's Network, okay? So
That would be.
Remember, this is the template name here, work group. This is just a variable name that they gave it. It could be called anything. Yes.
That would be like if you have a laptop and a PC
Desktop,
in two different areas of the house.
and you want to
You could
connect.
network them, so
Yeah.
that if you're working on one, it'll go to the other.
Well, you can actually open a file on the other computer and then save it to that computer
Mhm.
or save it locally or things like that. It allows you to behave in a logical manner across a network, and that's all because the NTFS file system allows you to connect and to share information, and it will, unfortunately, in a network that has only work groups, you don't have a whole lot of privacy and a lot of control over permissions. That comes under, in a large environment or corporate environment, you would have something called a domain, okay? And the domain might be called Shipley, for example, for this room here, and all the computers that we're talking on the Shipley domain would be able to communicate if networking was set up, and all the users would be able to access files and resources if they had the proper permissions, which are controlled by access control in the new technology file system, or NTFS. So I probably lost one or two of you in that diatribe, but it made perfect sense to me.
Well, no, I was thinking when I worked at college, they had different sections that they had several people working
Right.
in the same.
Those, you call those work groups. They
Mhm.
might call them work groups, and because people work as a group and share information and things like that. Or they can be a part of a domain as well that's set up for people to work together. You can also have something called a virtual LAN, which will only allow certain people with certain IP addresses to be able to communicate with each other and share information. So there's all kinds of ways to slice and dice this, probably as many ways as there are to count to infinity, so it just goes on and on. That's what I was saying at first when I started talking about computers, is that the opportunity for having hundreds of different interfaces or thousands of interfaces are completely possible, and it's growing exponentially, every day out there as processors get faster, as memory gets bigger, as domains get larger. And when I'm talking about domains, when I'm talking about this building here, the domain could be called shipley.com, but that doesn't mean that there's an internet domain out there called shipley.com. But there could be. Okay, if Shipley went out and bought the name shipley.com on the internet and registered it on the internet, they can have both the same name outside and inside their network. But the domain that I'm talking about is basically a server, or what's called Active Directory domain, which we're not going to get into at all, because that's a whole, it's not even a course, it's a whole degree.
Yeah, can of worms.
And that kind of stuff. So anyway, so this is, by right-clicking on my computer and properties, it'll bring up this page. So if we look at advanced system settings right here, if we click on that, this page comes up here, and you can have advanced system settings right here. You can set the performance parameters, you can change, you can add and remove user profiles. Let's say you have 10 people working on your machine and you want to kick 9 of them off. You can remove them right here. You can set up your startup and recovery parameters here, and we'll look at that more next week since we're going to be looking at backup and recovery. And you have something called environmental variables, okay? So this is where it gets into math a little bit. What's a constant? A constant is something that always stays the same, right? It stays constant. So when we look back at this page here, where it says work group right here, that's kind of a constant. It's always going to say work group there. This name can change. That's variable, okay? So this full computer name, that's constant. It says it right here, computer name. It's never going to change. But this can be something different, so this is variable. So in your environment, you have something called environment variables where you can set up how your computer works in here. And I can kind of see out of the corner of my eyes, Tom's eyes rolling in the corner of his head over there. Because this is just another way that you can make more granular changes to your environment to improve your computing abilities on your computer. But it's for advanced eyes. It's something that you would not deal with as a regular user. This, once again, is your system protection tab, and that's where you set up your restore points and things like that. This is your computer name, is where you change your computer name. Your hardware would be where your device manager information is. And remote is where you set up whether you're allowing remote access or not. Now, this is my favorite tool on the computer. I use this all the time. It's called the Task Manager, and if you're not using it, you should be using it. And by right-clicking on the desk in a taskbar in an empty space, you can bring up the Task Manager. And as you can see, right now the Task Manager on this computer is not real busy. Okay, my CPU is only at 33%. That's not bad. When I first turn this computer on, it's an i3. It jumps up to 100% and stays there for like 3 minutes. The reason it's doing that is because it's loading malware bytes and it's loading my backup information. It's doing all kinds of tasks. And I can actually follow every task as it loads up under the processes, because every application is made up of different processes that have to take place in the background for the application to work. And even those processes can be subdivided even more into sub-processes and then threads. So, and they can even be divided into more, which we're not going to even get into at all. What I'm trying to show you here, though, is that you should look at the performance of your computer. If it's not, doesn't appear to be working correctly, you want to see if your disk is pegged at 100%, or your memory is all used up, or your CPU is running at 100%, or not at all. And this is basically where you can tell if your Ethernet is going out and getting data from online or somewhere else on the network. This is really a fairly simple tool to use. I have this set under options. Let's see, which one do I have set here? I have set default tab. I have it set to performance, so when I start Task Manager, it comes right up here. You can set up to come up in any one of these tabs where you look at the processes or app history or startup. Okay. Startup is really important. This is your view, this is your interface as a user to know what programs are starting up when your computer first starts up, okay? And you can see all of these that are enabled, those are the ones that I'm allowing to start up on my computer. I'm allowing OneDrive because I log on with an account that connects to OneDrive, the Microsoft network. I also connect to the Apple network with iCloud because this is where I have pictures and things like that kept on there, and I can manage them from, I don't have to manage them from an Apple PC, I can manage them from my IBM compatible PC by being able to load these on there. I use Chrome even though some people don't like it. My trackpad loads up automatically, as does my password manager loads up automatically. But notice the things that I've turned off. I'm not really using KeePass on here, but I play with it once in a while, so I turn it off. It doesn't have to start with my computer. I turn off some of these other things that don't need to start with my computer, and that way I save resources on my computer when my computer starts up. This is another thing that takes a little time, a little bit of practice to be able to get good at using. But this interface will allow you to control a computer that is slow, basically, or starts up slow. What's the first thing you want to put in your computer if it has 4 gigs of RAM and it's running really slow? A solid state drive. okay? What would happen, the difference you'll see here is instead of, if I had a regular mechanical drive in here, instead of this CPU being busy for 3 minutes, it'd be busy for 10 minutes, you know, so it just depends on how patient you are along the way.
How do you know which programs to get rid of? That's, I mean, at the startup.
Well, that's a good question, because sometimes I'll look at this and I won't recognize something like for example, this guy here, HP Windows User Scheduler application. Okay, well, I have an HP printer and I have some other HP devices, and if this isn't running, they won't be ready immediately when I go to use them. They'll still work, but they'll have to be loaded and initialized before they will work. So I do want my backups to be, this is an online backup, I do want this to be available. This will be like where Carbonite is, you know, it would be here in the list, and you'd leave that to be enabled so I can do backups on this schedule. So we're going to be looking at services in a little while, and you'll see again how these things fit into it. On users on this computer, this is the user that's logged on right now. It tells how many of the resources I'm using. Details, we're going to see a new little TLA or 3-letter acronym today called the PID. Does anybody know what that stands for? That's your process ID. Every one of these processes in here has an identification so that it can be identified by the system. So it has a process ID, and it tells you how much memory it's using, and a whole bunch of other, and who's using it. Like, it's not only me, sometimes it can be the system or the local service, okay? So one of the things we're going to look at in a little more depth before we run out of time is services, because I think services are really, really important. Does everybody know what services are? So it's a good thing to talk about them. You can see in services, some things are started and some things are stopped. Some things are running, some things are stopped, some are running. Okay? So let's go back to our slides here. Oh, look at that. What is a Windows service? Okay. So Windows services are long-running executable files that you don't start on your own. Things that Windows starts automatically when your computer starts up. Okay? We have some control over them. They run in the background. There's no user interface for them except for the service console. They could be services like a database server or antivirus or secure shell or HTTP or printer spooler. What's the printer spooler for? That's where your print jobs are before they get printed. So it's your printing cache is what it is. Okay. You can set them to run on startup, to delay the run. Manuals start with parameters or specific names. They can be programmed to run with other applications and things like that. We're not going to get deep into services. So this is kind of like that screen we last looked at, but there is also another interface. I'm going to type Windows. I click in the right box here. Services.msc. And it brings up a program called Services, which is going to start up in just a second here. Okay, so these are the Windows services. And what happens when you click on the top here? It alphabetizes it. Okay? So that's forward and that's back. You can see this little caret changes here. Whenever you see these columns on top of a page, you can sort by those columns. So we can sort by status. We can have all the running ones. These are the ones that are not running. We can have all the ones that are running. And as we scroll down, we can see the other ones down below it. The startup type. Some are automatic, some are manual. Some are automatically triggered by other processes. Some are delayed. So just an example of why do you have a delayed start on something, okay? Usually because it interferes with something else. So you wait until the machine gets running properly, and then you turn that on. And that's something that you often have to do with certain programs like antivirus and things like that, especially if you're running more than one, because they too tend to interfere with each other. Okay? But this is a Windows search application. This is a user profile service. So we've been looking at user profiles. Well, what controls how your user profile works? Well, there's a program in your computer that runs in the background as a service. You don't have to do anything about it. It's called the user profile service that takes care of all that stuff for you. So you don't have to worry about it. There's a user manager. But there's the print spooler. I just had it right here. So that the print service, it spools print jobs and handles interactions with the printer. You know, that's what there's a whole description here. If I open this up all the way, it would go off the page. So we're not going to do that right now. There's a Malwarebytes service. So Malwarebytes installs a service on your computer when you install Malwarebytes. And that controls how and when Microsoft works, if it starts with your computer or not. This computer actually has the paid version of Malwarebytes on it, so it starts up every time my computer starts, and that's one of the things that slows down the central processing unit. So it's important that you have some kind of malware application on your system. Windows Update Service is on here. Probably just called Windows Update Service. There's the Windows Installer, Windows Backup, Shadow Copy. Okay, now what is Shadow Copy? Does anybody have any idea what Shadow Copy is? Your computer is constantly making backups. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about Shadow Copy next week. But if you haven't saved backups, that doesn't mean all your files are automatically lost, because Windows is protecting you with these things called shadow copies. But you need a special tool called the Shadow Copy tool. Shadow Express, I think it's called. Shadow Explorer, that's what it's called. So you can actually get in there and recover files if they were backed up by the operating system. I'm looking for the update. Let's see. System up. So here's the Lenovo system update, because this is a Lenovo computer. But there's also the Windows Update server in here somewhere. But so let's look at one of these services here. Let's just look at one of them. We're going to right-click on it and go to Properties. Notice we have things like Start and Stop is grayed out, and Pause and everything. Why are these all grayed out? Because it's not started, so you don't need all these things here. If we look at one that's already started here, we right-click on this one here, and we go, you can see Stop because it's already running. If we go to Properties, okay, it gives us information about that service. It starts up automatically, but it's delayed. It's one of those ones that starts up a little bit after all the other services start up. I can stop it. I can actually, it gets logged on by a local system account. I can assign it a regular user account if I want, but if it's not an administrator account, it might not work. I can recover if it doesn't start up. I can tell it if it doesn't start up 3 times to the first time it fails. I can tell it to restart again, or run a program, or restart the computer. There's so much stuff you can do here as part of the user interface to the computer. You don't need to get into all the technicalities of all this stuff, but the bottom line is that all these values are kept somewhere on your computer, and they can all be changed. They can be changed here, or where else can they be changed? In the registry. With what tool? The registry editor. Okay? Some of these can also be changed through the control panel. Okay? So these are all parameters. These are all interfaces that can be manipulated through your computer tools, the user interface tools. So like I said, they could be, services can be started, paused, pending, or stopped. There's all kinds of ways to start it. And you can start as a local system user, as a local service, or as a network service. There's all different types of ways these things can be started. That's not really that interesting to us because we're not doing a whole lot with that. But this is that general screen we're looking at, and parameters that can be changed and start and stop. And you can set up the users and user passwords and things like that. So services are really important as a user interface when you're trying to keep your computer running healthy and things are not running well. This is an area you can look and set and reset stuff. If a service is supposed to be running and it fails, you can restart the service, and that might be, for example, let's say your printer isn't printing. You know, you can go and restart the spooler service, and your printer will probably start printing again. So it's all things that you would use to control your system. So we have Windows services, which are basically programs that run in the background all the time. And we have something else, another interface that we can set up tasks to run. So say we want Malwarebytes to start every day at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Malwarebytes would actually go into the task manager, the task scheduler, and it would set up a task to run at 3 o'clock every day, and every time 3 o'clock came around, that process would automatically kick off. So the big difference between a Windows service and a task scheduler is that Windows services run all the time or when they're triggered to start, whereas a task scheduler will actually have a time for something to start, it will start, it will run, and then it will just stop until the next time comes up again in the scheduler. There's so much more to this, we really can't get into all of it. This little link on the page here will take you through that. This is the perfect computer. You know, you don't have to get off the commode. You can store your drinks right there. You can see if people are looking at you. You can drink water. You can put in even RO water if you want. But that would be the type of computer we all want to have in our house. I don't know if the women would appreciate it here and there. You know, but this is probably where you flush it. I don't know, a cup holder. That's all. Never mind. But anyway, it's just a little bit of computer humor here. Copy and paste pedals on the bottom here. A little fridge to keep your cold drinks in. So we should all have an office janitor like that. He knows so much more about our computers than we do. Looks like you need to reformat your hard disk, reinstall all your software, and replace your motherboard. I also suggest you upgrade your operating system. We all want to be told that kind of stuff. This is the way most of our computers are these days. We have 5 kilobytes of useful information and 500 billion gigabytes of database of useless information. If we managed our computers well, this wouldn't be a problem, but as we get larger and larger hard disks, and computer manufacturers throw more and more crap on our computers when we buy them, we tend to go more toward the right than we do toward the left. We really didn't have a whole lot of time to talk about it. We should probably add this to our conversation next week because this is kind of an important subject, especially for people who don't feel comfortable typing. We can use speech recognition to actually create emails, or we could even use it to read emails using the narrator and things like that. But what I want to bring up on this page is you can start this process, you can set up your microphone, take a speech tutorial so that your computer learns your speech. You can train your computer to better understand you, and then there's a reference card that gives you all the common commands. Gives you all the common commands. So
I'm learning.
Yes, so you can go into the reference card and actually become a good communicator with your computer. We used to have like Dragon Naturally Speaking, remember that? Dragon Naturally Speaking was a speech recognition service, but you also had to have a reference card with that too, because you have to know what commands you can use when you do it. So I think that's the end of this slide presentation
Bone, the
here.
leg bone connected to the knee bone connected to the thigh bone connected to the hip bone connected to the backbone, the